Alrighty, it's Thursday night. Welcome to Real Monsters. I'm SK Barrett,
Welcome, welcome.
and
And
I
I am Wes.
Wes. I apologize for missing last week, but I kind of blew my knee out and was really not up to doing a show.
You
Uh,
did. You needed the rest anyway. So
well,
I apologize for missing a week with the plague, but I am back and better than ever. Well,
man,
maybe better than ever.
and we just chock full of excuses.
Oh, yeah.
You got the
Yep.
flu. I have a blown out knee. Whatever. All right, we have what might be one of the more interesting shows yet tonight. And
Absolutely.
I want to start with how should I st- I want to start with I want to start with a story.
Yes, you are.
So in January of 1986, let me make sure I got that right. Yeah. January of 1986. I was I attended a funeral with my wife at the time and my daughters at the time. It was uh, my wife's aunt had passed away,
Mm.
and it was a January afternoon, probably a Saturday, and um, the graveside service was at a cemetery called Mountain View Cemetery. And the reason it's called Mountain View Cemetery, oddly enough, is because there's this fantastic view of Mount Rainier
Mm.
from this
Yeah.
property. I mean, people would pay millions for this lot.
Mm.
Um, and on the days when you can actually see the mountain, which is not usually the case in January.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at the cemetery at the graveside service, and on the street, the little road that's that runs along the ridge line of this hill past the cemetery, this police
Mm-hmm.
car pulls up. And a few
Mm.
minutes later, another police car, and another police car, and another, and just pretty soon the whole place is jam-packed with emergency vehicles of various types. We
Mm-hmm.
don't, we're at at a funeral. We don't know what's going on. But we found out that night on the news.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found out was this Thunderbird. I think that, God, that looks like a Thunderbird. This car had been found pushed down the hillside between the cemetery and Highway 18. And in this car, they found the body of
Mm-hmm.
Kimi Kai Pitzer, who had been missing since April 1983, so almost 3 years. She was 16 at the time she disappeared, and she was, depending on how you count it, the 20th or the 22nd victim of the Green River Killer.
Mm-hmm.
Her head had been found um, 2 years before, but her body somehow was in this stolen car.
Wow. Hmm.
And um, and that is one of the ways that I was in proximity to this motherfucker and his handiwork.
One of the more twisted of them, I definitely think. It just occurred to me too that you could call that story death adjacent to a funeral.
Quite true. Quite true.
Little gallows humor for y'all there. But yeah, wow. And she was, and it's just wrapping your mind around the numerical scope of how many people Ridgway killed
Yeah,
is just,
it's astonishing. So Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, was convicted of 48 murders
mm-hmm.
over not a very large time span. I mean,
No, not at all.
when you compare it to others, like BTK crossed decades, right?
He did. He didn't have nearly the frequency though, but yeah, he did. I mean, I think, is one of the more controlled of who we've looked at. Ridgway, not so much from the what
No.
I could grasp from what I was looking at, but um,
Yeah, and the reason he was called the Green River Killer was because his first victims were found in the Green River. Now, the Green River
mm-hmm,
flows through many communities south of Seattle, and
mm-hmm,
and uh, he dumped several bodies in and along the Green River. The first one was Wendy Cofield, also age 16.
mm-hmm.
And she was only missing for a week in 1982.
Oh, so that's a. I was just wanting to get a better idea of the actual geographical scope of the river. It's only 65 miles
Yeah.
inside Washington. Okay. I was wondering if it might have flowed up into Canada too, but
No, no, it's a small little local river that runs out of the Cascade Mountains and it dumps
then,
into Puget Sound.
uh-huh. Yeah, for those, including myself, who haven't been there. But yeah, wow.
Um, the thing about Ridgway um, was nobody suspected him. I mean, he was so under the radar that even a couple of times when the police picked him up in their sights, they
Mm-hmm.
dismissed him as
Oh,
a possible killer.
they really did. And the other thing that kind of got me with it, before Ridgway was really on their radar, they were just concentrating on bodies that were dumped in the water. And it took Bob Keppel, the noted criminologist and investigator, coming in and looking at it around 83 to tell them that, hey, this guy's not done. And you need to widen your search. You need to widen your net to any woman who has been strangled and dumped out in a rural area.
Hmm.
Because it was, I'm not sure why he stopped killing then, or if he just sort of switched to his geography.
Yeah,
But
that's really more of the case.
uh
Um,
huh.
he um, he had several methods and locations for dumping, and um, yeah, so the river was just the initial spot, and there are several clusters of
Hmm.
body dumps.
Yeah. Which, and getting into the purpose, well, maybe we should leave that to a bit down the line here as to why he would leave them the way that he did.
Right.
But yeah, he started in 82 and he wasn't caught until 2001. And
Yeah.
then tried and convicted in '03, wasn't it, on the 48?
Right. And that was via a plea bargain. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, but he has since said that he has killed up to I think 88.
Oh, wow. I had thought it was 94, but.
88,
It,
94. It might depend on which day you catch him, right?
well, and that's
But
like some of the sources were saying that it was 49 he was convicted on. I'm like, no, I thought it was 48.
yeah, it was 48. And the
Yeah,
thing is, um, this guy, his whole family, nobody who knew him personally s- believed him capable of doing this.
yeah.
And
And he was married 3 times.
married three
Um,
times. He had
but
he
still,
had extended family,
yeah.
and um, that it's not like it's not like you would think. Well, like this comes to light, and people go, "Oh, now that makes sense." No, there was none of that.
No, there wasn't. And the FBI, in fact, this profiler I had read, Margaret O'Toole is
Hmm.
her name.
Yeah.
She was talking about having spoken with Ridgway's wives, who all said that he treated them fairly well in the
Yeah.
relationship. But she said that just because he didn't do any violence to them doesn't mean he didn't think of it.
Right.
She believes that he avoided it for the sole purpose that
It
he
would be
was, he might have been
suspicious.
dumb. Yeah, he might have been dumb, but he wasn't dumb enough to, not see that he wouldn't be fingered
Right.
for a crime like murdering his wife. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. You know, he wasn't he's not especially bright IQ wise, but he's plenty cunning.
well, and that's where I thought that Bundy's quote on him really brought all that to bear. And this was before we even knew who Ridgway was with all this. When they actually asked Ted Bundy what his thoughts were on the crime, because he was recently incarcerated in Florida
Hmm.
for the sorority murders,
Right.
where he said this guy knows it the way a fox knows his stuff.
Yeah.
He's not
Instinctive.
smart. Yeah, he's instinctive. He's not going to sit down and analyze. He's going to act on instinct.
Yeah. What you see
Was what
now,
Bundy.
by the way, what you see now are the composite sketches that the police had been given on various occasions.
Hmm.
Yeah. So Gary Ridgway actually lived not very far from where I grew up. I mean, surprisingly close. Let me let me pull this up. All right. So here's a map showing Ridgway's house in relation to the house that I grew up in.
I'm getting an idea of scale there. What's that? Maybe 10 miles?
No, not even. I
Okay.
let me tell you, I could have driven that in about 5 minutes
Okay.
on
Gotcha.
on streets that topped out at 35.
Heavily residential areas
Yep,
mostly.
yep.
Huh.
And just to the north of this map is the SeaTac Airport. Um, it's a good
Hmm.
question. Becky asked a question in the chat that if we think that Bundy knew Ridgway, and you're right, they did not know each other personally, um, because
I think he had a definite beat on the type, though.
absolutely. Um,
Hmm.
besides which, Ridgway didn't talk.
No.
He didn't
And
talk
that's
about his
an
stuff. He kept it
no.
completely to himself.
He wasn't a social butterfly the way that Ted Bundy was.
Right.
And that's, I think, another important thing to realize is that most of these killers that we look at, I mean, even Bundy, who is social, is still going to be a loner when it comes to these sorts of things. It is increasingly rare, exceedingly rare that serial killers work in teams or,
Right.
as doubles. In fact, the only one that I can think of off the top of my head was Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, who was the Texas serial killer. And Otis Toole was actually the guy who killed John Walsh's son,
Oh,
Adam
okay.
Walsh.
Okay.
hmm But it's just very, very rare to have that dynamic where two of them work together.
Yeah.
And that does lead into another interesting thing, though, because no doubt with a lot of these, they're operating in the same geographic area and they're operating more or less in the same time frame. Would there have been a sort of dynamic of one-upsmanship when they see the other guy's work?
Right. Well, in this case, that really would not have been much possible very much because, um,
Mm-hmm.
well, Bundy was incarcerated and or on the run, or there wasn't a ton of overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
uh, and stylistically, they were quite different. Bundy was
they
much more
were.
brazen. Um, Ridgway
Mm-hmm.
hunted almost exclusively amongst prostitutes. By the way, um, in this map, you see the I-5 running down the middle here.
I do.
Okay, and the large thoroughfare to the left of that, or to the west, running north and south, is Pacific
Mm-hmm.
Highway, Highway 99, and
Okay.
that's where he hunted.
Yep.
That's where he hunted. Okay.
Now, is that more or less the red light district for
Y-
this area?
I keep hearing about that, and look how close I grew up to Highway 99, right?
Uh-huh.
Half a mile tops. I
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever remember seeing a hooker along the this road, but apparently they were there
Hmm.
and are
Well,
still there, and I to this day have never seen one.
huh.
But
Well.
clearly,
Mm-hmm.
clearly they are there, and even even as far south as Ridgway's house,
Mm-hmm.
and farther north up right along parallel to the airport. Those are apparently prime, um, streetwalker territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I, I,
It makes
I don't know.
sense. It'd
I,
be.
never saw it. I was not that I
Huh.
was not that I was conscious of. I never once went, oh look, there's one.
Yeah, I had to laugh the other night. I was watching a show on, I think it was Travel Channel, Mysteries at the Museum, and they had a bit on the Shanghai tunnels in Seattle. It's just making me think of Vice and, you know, all of it around there,
Yeah.
up in that area, where they would run opium and human smuggling through those. In fact, that's where the expression getting Shanghai comes from, if I'm not mistaken.
Uh, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does because they would, kidnap people and smuggle them through there. But getting off topic, bit of a tangent there.
Yeah. So if Ridgway had lived literally just across to the west of I-5 instead of to the east of I-5, he would have been in my school district.
Oh wow.
And so,
Mr. Deadman asks if you're the Green River Killer, and I was just thinking, haven't we already established that you are Ted Bundy reincarnated?
how could I be reincarnated if we were contemporaneous?
Oh, good question. Maybe you ate his soul after he was executed or something. I don't know. I thought he
with
was soulless,
with
but who
fava
knows?
beans and a nice Chianti.
uh,
But honest to God, so because of the proximity of where these bodies were found, and some of them were found um, really pretty damn close to where I grew up. So you look at, see, number two, Gazelle, you
mhm.
see on this map here? That's that's right fucking where I lived, man.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
And this cluster along the Green River, when those were found, you know, I lived in Auburn here. And so, I spent years going, I'm gonna be really surprised if I don't if somebody in my family doesn't know this fucker
Mhm.
because we're all over this area. We all grew up in this area. Many of us lived in the area at the time, and we have extensive,
Mhm.
family connections and friends networks, and through
Mhm.
social and church and school. And we're thinking, you know, how could we not know who this guy is?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you
and
might
it
not know him, but know of him.
right,
Somebody.
like
Yeah.
somebody who knows somebody, just like 1 degree, 2 degrees at tops. And in fact, there was a family down the road where I grew up
Mhm.
that one of my when they had set up the Green River hotline to take tips, that
Mhm.
my brother called in and said, "Hey, these guys who we used to live next, down the street from, you got to look into them."
Hmm.
And they
Wow.
said, "Oh yeah, we know about those guys." It
Wow.
wasn't their style. So,
Oh, definitely.
but they were definitely capable of it, but um, it was not
Mhm.
their MO. They were more into knives.
Yeah. Yeah, in which, by the way, strangling is sort of the MO du jour of most killers. And it was with Ridgway, too. And in fact, thinking of the MO and certain psychological quirks about the guy, Bundy called something else with him. And that was the necrophilia. He said that he's leaving these bodies where he's leaving them so he can revisit and do the deed.
Well, yeah, and it's pretty evident that Bundy did that too.
Yeah,
Uh,
it takes one to know one.
yeah, he Bundy went back, to, especially the girls um, from Lake Sammamish
Hmm.
that he deposited up on Taylor Mountain. He definitely um, he definitely went back to those.
He did, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and Mr. Deadman asks, who would you rather have a beer with, Bundy or the Green River Killer? I kind of doubt Ridgway would talk if you had a beer with him.
yeah, I agree with you there. Um, he wasn't a chatty fellow.
No,
Bundy was he was an extrovert.
definitely. He could probably talk your ear off
Yeah.
if you got him on the right topics.
Whether you could believe what he said or not is another thing, but he definitely would talk.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely don't believe him, but yeah, he would absolutely talk. And there you have the later part of this where Ridgway made a deal with the state.
Yeah,
Spare me the death penalty and I will take you two other bodies.
right. And he did. What's interesting is if he killed, somewhere around 90, He was convicted of 48. He has not
Hmm.
ever provided any details on the other killings,
Hmm.
not names or
What?
locations or anything. So I don't know what he's holding out on.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's not like he's going to have anything in the way of leverage now, you
Right.
know? But yeah, that's really strange. You would think, I mean, most of these guys, being as narcissistic as they are, want the record set straight
Yes.
after they're locked up, for life.
Yeah. Um, Bundy was
And
pretty
those,
Bundy was pretty
uh huh.
open about his victims. He wasn't always able to. Some of them have never been found, and some of them has never revealed more than general areas. Um,
Hmm.
but as far as I know, Ridgway has remained pretty silent about the rest of his victims, other than that the number is almost double what he was convicted of.
Wow. Yeah,
So
most definitely.
one of the things that happened, by the way, there is on Amazon, not on Prime though, there is a pretty good documentary about the Green River Killer that was put together by Ridgway's family.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow, I'm going to check that out.
yeah, I think it's called something like The Green River Killer Was My Uncle. Um,
Oh, I think I saw it. Yeah, I think I saw that somewhere when I was looking.
it costs
I
like it
watched.
costs like $4 to buy it, and it's got a lot of terrific archival footage, um, and it really brought back a lot of stuff watching that growing up. I mean, not growing up. I was a young man with a family already by the time this stuff hit the news. Um, but I've haven't thought about a lot of those things in a lot of years. Um,
Yeah, having the victims of it makes me think of another interesting point here.
yeah,
That was that he killed cross racially.
right.
That's not something that you see too often with these killers. They usually like to hunt within their own ethnic group.
That's very true.
Hmm. But it almost makes me wonder if his base criterion wasn't just opportunity, and that they are, so desperate that they'll get in his truck. Because he picked most of them up as streetwalkers, as we were saying.
Absolutely. I think pretty close to 100%. Um,
Hmm.
and so in this documentary, one of the investigators talks about um, going to the women's prison to talk to convicted prostitutes to see if they remember anybody, suspicious running across somebody. Like, did you ever run across somebody and get a weird vibe or something? Or because they
Hmm.
were they were just out of clues at the time. And the investigator talked to this one woman, and I gotta look and see on the list if I can recognize the name.
I'm
Uh,
dropping the documentary in the chat right now.
Excellent.
Found it on IMDb so people can go there.
Um, I wanna, yeah, I think it was Carol Ann Christensen
Hmm.
was in jail at the time when the investigator went in and talked to her, and and this girl told the investigator that she would never be a victim because she would be able to tell. She'd pick up on his vibe, so to speak. That she would be able to de- detect some clues and cues that would tip her off that this guy was, you know, gonna kill her.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And she was wrong.
She became more or less his, um, looking for the correct word here, his signature victim, I guess you could say. Man, the
Right.
staging of that body sticks out.
Yeah, it's we don't have any pictures of that, and that's probably for the best. Um,
Yeah.
he,
She
he
was
he
in the woods.
so first of all, let's point out one of the significant things is he didn't stage bodies.
No,
Uh,
he didn't.
but one he did. So
And
so
that
how
was
was it?
Carol Ann.
Yeah, and how was it staged?
She was on her back in the woods, nude, I'm pretty sure, with a paper bag over her face, her hands clutching a wine bottle, ground sausage in the shape of a pyramid over her hands, and a trout across her throat and another on her shoulder.
Like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah,
Jesus, what the hell is that all about? That is so many bizarre, bizarre things.
yeah. Well, and I was racking my brain trying to think of this, and it occurred to me that if you are a necrophile out there, why are you going to put things that are going to attract critters to the bodies?
Right,
Things like meat and fish.
right.
They're going to decay that much faster.
And she must have been found pretty snappy because I saw photos of this. Yeah, what? 6 months?
Hmm.
No, wait, that's the wrong one. No, just 5 days. Okay, she was only gone 5 days because I saw photos of her body and the staging and the fish and stuff, and it was barely touched by animals.
Mm. It's still, I mean, if you're looking at his thought process for that, I can't even fathom. I
Well,
mean, with the bottle, you could maybe he used that to assault her. I don't know, and he liked doing that.
I
But
I
the
I,
meat in the trout, I just don't know.
I don't. Did has anybody made an attempt to decipher that? You know what it could have. It just might have been to try to throw the cops off the trail, right? To just throw a wrench into their profile
It could be. I mean, maybe it was just a red herring for them.
or a red trout.
But even, yeah, but even Bob Keppel, when he saw that, he had no idea why. But you look at other strange symbology that we've looked at.
Right,
Velisca comes to mind with the
right,
bacon,
right.
so it has to be related to something. But
Maybe. Um, so, I found it fascinating that this Carolyn Christensen, you know, the she confirms sadly that the whole point of this show, really, honest to God, one of the main reasons why I came up with doing this show isn't to glorify uh, monsters, but to
hmm,
let people face the facts that you can't tell these motherfuckers from normal people most of the time. Like almost
right,
never.
right, you absolutely can't. But our best bet, I think, to get anywhere even close to that is to study them.
Yeah. Um, you know, you know, this young woman was an experienced um, street walking professional prostitute who had been
Hmm.
arrested on, I think, multiple occasions. Um, which then again
I'm
says
sure.
her radar wasn't all that great if she got arrested. She couldn't tell a cop.
Well, well, yeah, that, or it could have been a learning experience for her a couple of times.
Maybe. Um,
Hmm.
but these fuckers are so devious and deceptive, and you know this guy could drive up in the middle of this terror, that's plaguing the area, and it's on the news every fucking night about
Hmm.
bodies being found and what's going on with the investigation and all of this shit. And it's, very clear early on that he targets prostitutes. And
Oh
yet,
yeah.
and yet, he could still drive up to these women and get them in his fucking truck
Hmm.
over and over and over again.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that gets back to one of the trademarks of a psychopath, the lack of empathy. And what do they have to do when they have a lack of empathy? They have
Fake
to
it.
make shit up, literally.
Yeah,
Mimic.
yeah. They have.
Mimic other people.
Yep.
That's how they get their camouflage, and that's how they hide.
Yeah, absolutely. And they learn mimicking from a very early age because they s- uh, they get into situations where everybody's around them is having some kind of an emotional response to an event, and they don't.
Hmm.
And people start going, "What the fuck's wrong with you? How are you just
Yeah.
sitting there?" And they go, "Oh shit." They look around and go, "Everybody else is doing this," and they don't like it when I'm not doing what they're doing. It makes people
Yeah.
really uncomfortable, so they learn at a very young age to mimic the emotional responses. And they have to learn every different variation on that. Things that
They
to
do.
the rest of us just happen without thinking, they have to consciously make note of those circumstances and what the right response is, and then they get it wrong sometimes, and so they have to make variations on that. It's very, God, it must be exhausting trying to keep up that
Oh,
pretense.
absolutely. I'm trying to think of the movie I was watching the other night. It was about a psychopath, and it might have been one of the famous serial killers actually studying and refining their gestures in a mirror.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw that. Um,
That's going to bug me now.
yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I can't think of it either.
But, it's literally like that. They learned you have to mimic, and you have to, in essence, bullshit to survive.
Yeah, and it might have been, now that you mentioned that, Bundy obviously was really good at that.
Yeah.
Ridgway might have been less good at it, and might have been part of why he was so introverted.
Hmm.
You expect less of an introvert, right? I
Yeah.
mean, in a social situation.
Yeah, you really do. And I think comparing them again, though, you have the intelligence difference as well, between Ridgway and Bundy.
Yeah,
And that by definition is going to make one better than the other, I would think, at,
right,
something like studying people.
right, right.
But
Yeah, so, you know, it, God, I- it's, I don't even know. This guy just like, I don't even know where to go with this guy because he's just such a just such a horrific monster. And you know, you just don't. God, I don't know. It's so
Yeah, I
he's
mean,
he's so different from Bundy, and yet so similar. Did I don't know
yeah.
if we brought this up in the last show, but I ran across some recent research about sociopaths that showed that
Mm-hmm.
they actually have less gray matter in what is it, the amygdala, the
Yeah.
part of the
I,
brain that controls emotions.
well, and it also is a central repository of fear, the
Yes, yeah.
amygdala.
Yeah. So they actually have significantly less gray matter in that part of the brain, and that might be a contributing factor to why they are sociopaths.
Yeah, and that also goes back to an older theory with that, which says that a low resting heart rate can actually be an indicator of a sociopath, too. The rationale with that is if they don't feel fear the same way, they're going to be more likely to do risk taking behavior as a big thing. They're going to be more likely to do also things that are immoral or illegal without being
All
so
right.
afraid they're going to be caught.
I have mm,
Just a
I'm
theory.
gonna take an exception to that because a resting heart rate, you're not subjected to fear, kind of by definition.
Well, I mean, that's true. I'm not sure what the other physiological implications are of that, but I do know it's a theory.
Well, I can tell you that when I was a young man, and when I was like, really fit and that kind of shit in high school,
Hmm.
I had a low enough resting heart rate that, when I went in for my school physical, that the doctor commented on it
Uh-huh.
as a positive thing. So if if a sociopath has a lower heart rate than a very aerobically fit 17-year-old, then geez, how do they walk around?
Uh-huh.
It doesn't seem a lot of people who are very athletic will have low resting heart rates. It doesn't make sense that that would be a correlation to me.
Well, here is what a um, National Institute of Health study found. This was looking at physiological arousal and juvenile psychopathy. Is low resting heart rate associated with affective dimensions? Now I'm going to read just the first paragraph of the abstract.
Yeah,
A
sure.
wealth of past research has examined the relationship between low physiological arousal and violence or antisocial behavior. Relatively little research, however, has examined the relationship between low physiological arousal and psychopathic traits, with even less having been conducted with juveniles. The current study attempts to fill this gap by evaluating juveniles' physiological arousal using resting heart rate and their levels of psychopathic traits. Results suggest that there is indeed an inverse relationship between resting heart rate and the affective traits of psychopathy, uncaring, callousness, and unemotionality, as well as thrill or sensation seeking in males. No significant relationship was found in females. Implications of the findings, as well as study limitations and future directions, are discussed. That's what the
Oh,
rest of it
well, they
gets
say an
into.
inverse relationship.
Between heart rate and the affective traits of psychopathy.
Hmm.
We'll post that.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I understand what they're going for there because, um, sociopaths sometimes, they don't feel um, things the way that normal people do, right?
Right.
and they crave that oftentimes. And so they, you will find them in more risky professions and hobbies, and
Mhm.
because they're trying to generate some kind of, emotion in themselves.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely.
Um,
I was just looking at another one here. The second one, it's resting heart rate and psychopathy revisited, also by the NIH. But I think it kind of gets back to Pavlov's idea of the bell curve too, where people fall on that as far as
yeah.
nervous system activity.
Mm,
And that was one of his big things when he coined that whole idea.
right. So,
But
so one of you know what got Ridgway caught finally. So here's the thing about Ridgway is he was interviewed like fairly early on in during when the task force was formed,
mm-hmm,
and they dismissed him as a suspect, and then he got back on their radar several years later and was again uh, dismissed as a viable suspect.
and that was from a prostitute that got away from him, wasn't it? I mean, when
Um,
he got on there
yeah,
later.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because they couldn't link him to it. I guess he tried to kill her and she got away.
yeah.
But
One got away, and
that was that second time where they took a buccal swab from him.
yes, and that's what nailed
Mm-hmm.
him eventually. But the thing that got him even under suspicion in the first place was because he was arrested for soliciting prostitutes.
Mm-hmm.
He was arrested a couple of different times for it.
He was.
And
That was like his main sexual outlet.
yes, and and it was his, Achilles heel, so to speak. It was the weak link in his MO was that he not only well, here's the thing we don't know. It just dawned on me. We don't know how many he hired and didn't kill,
Oh yeah.
if at
Yeah,
all.
there would be no way to tell.
Right.
Yeah. That's what Becky said. Wow, I didn't know one got away. There might have been several who got away.
Well,
There's no way of
we know there
telling.
was one that he attacked and got away.
Yeah.
And I think very much like Bundy, he went right out and found somebody else and killed her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm pretty sure
Well,
that was the case
oh,
because he
even like Jack the Ripper when he was interrupted. I mean, it's
right
kind of a common trait for them to
right
go
because
out and
they
kill
have
another.
right they have this massive buildup and then are frustrated and they have to find that outlet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Um,
And that's where a lot of people who have studied Ridgway in depth think it was basically his voracious sexual appetite that drove him to do what he did. And that was basically the main thing. When he was asked why he didn't just pay prostitutes for sex, why he, had to use dead bodies, and he said, because I don't like paying them.
and he was also asked why he did it, why he killed him. And you know what his
Mm-hmm.
answer was? Because I could get away with it.
Wow. That's a level of deviousness just in that.
Yeah, because I knew I could get away with it. And so he um you know, he figured out that uh, there it would be really hard to track him down. Um, and if he hadn't
See,
been as voracious as, this is a good word for it, because he killed. I mean, let's just look at this. Just in um, 19. Let's see. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
I was just thinking of that, of the
One, two,
years.
three, four, five, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 in the last half of 1982.
Wow.
Okay. What if he'd had the
Sheesh.
control of BTK?
Oh yeah.
If he'd had the self control of a BTK, he might still be out there because targeting prostitute. Well, of course, dumping them in a place where they're easily found didn't help him any. Um,
Yeah.
but if he had been more cunning in his disposal and had more self control, so that they were less likely to be discovered and
Mhm.
less frequently discovered,
Oh
um,
yeah.
then you know there might not have been even a task force.
Mhm.
But as it was, there were three in July and one, two, three, four in August of
How
1982.
many how many did he kill from 1987 to 2000? Out of curiosity, do you have that
Very, very
in
few,
front of you?
very few. One in 87 the whole year. One in
Uh-huh.
86 the whole year. One in 90, one in 98. And then there's, yeah, just that.
So we have an 8-year gap in the middle of that with none on the record. Huh. I wonder if that would be
Yeah,
part
so
of
there
the
there was a
other ones.
93 was just unbelievable. I mean, 83,
Mhm.
unbelievable numbers. One, two, three, four, five, six, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 24, two a month, two a month in
Phew.
1983, two a month.
Wow.
I mean, that's double Bundy's entire total
It
in
is.
1 year.
Man. I was just thinking there with that huge gap too. I wonder what happened.
Well, that
Or
might
if it's
be
just ones that aren't on the record.
right.
Huh.
Right. So that might very well explain these other numbers that he claims.
Because it's not like Ridgway was in the hospital or even
Nope.
incarcerated for anything else over that time period.
I don't think he ever even served any jail time for his arrests for soliciting prostitution.
No, he didn't.
I think
So he was out there.
yeah, he was always out there. He held down a steady job all this time at Kenworth, at the Kenworth
Mm-hmm.
factory in Renton, which is like 10 minutes from where I'm sitting right now.
Mm-hmm. It was also paint from that factory deposited into one of the scenes that helped
Yes.
to nail him. He
Yeah.
was a truck painter at
Yeah.
that factory.
That's right. And very easily identified chemical composition of that paint that belonged just to Kenworth.
Right. But of course, they waited on a lot of that because I guess the DNA wasn't refined, or science, science wasn't where it needed to be
Oh,
until.
yeah. When they first started finding these bodies, DNA was not at all
Hmm.
used in criminal cases.
Right. And it wasn't where it needed to be until, or was it that somebody just didn't look at that sample again until 2001? I think it might have been a combination of both of them,
Yeah.
where somebody just didn't look at the buccal swab that they took from him in 1982, 83 until '01.
Right. They almost forgot that they'd had it.
Mm-hmm. I
Um,
imagine.
it's interesting that they took that at that time because what were they going to do with it? They,
Yeah.
in those days, they didn't have much they could do, but they took the mouth swab and he freely gave it up. How weird is that?
Yeah. Well, maybe he figured there's not much you could do with it.
Yeah.
But then again, that might be imputing a little bit more intelligence on Ridgway than he had. But, you know.
Right. Yeah. Don't mean to do that. One of the strange one of the strange stories about that comes out in the documentary is that he took his little nephew, I think it was like 8 or 10 at the time. He took him out fishing on a fishing trip over a weekend to, I'm gonna say Oregon, and
Mm-hmm.
he fucking took a body in the back of the pickup
Oh,
to
wow.
to dispose while he was in Oregon
Jeez.
with his
Man.
nephew in the car, in the truck.
Wow.
Now
That,
that's
for some reason, wow. That just reminded me of the story of Ed Kemper driving with the head in the back of his vehicle to a shrink's appointment in California.
yeah.
But
Kemper is an interesting one. He features largely in that TV series Mindhunters,
Mindhunter, yeah. Mindhunter is excellent if you haven't watched it.
and the guy who plays him does such a fantastic job.
Oh, he is haunting in that.
Yeah,
And, and Kemper was one of them who was a more sociable killer.
right.
He was a guy who liked to talk. And he was affable, too, when he would give interviews.
Yes, very much so. So one of the things that the police asked, and they actually showed this to family members later when they were making this documentary, and I don't think they knew this early on, but during the police interviews, um, Ridgway was asked about this nephew that he took fishing,
Mm-hmm.
and it came out during this interview that had it been necessary, he totally would have killed that nephew to cover his tracks.
Wow. Sheesh. Man. You know,
Um,
when he was asked by a shrink, what is it that you lack that everybody else has, he said empathy. He said caring
yeah,
was his word, but empathy.
he probably didn't know what empathy meant.
Yeah. Man.
And that kind of goes to, I mean, there's not, with a sociopath, with a psychopath, there's no, I care for this and not for that. It's just gone. Just doesn't exist.
Yeah. They are incapable, literally, of it.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it would be like if you or I had some old rocking chair that was, really broken and no good, and we decided to chop it up and throw it on the fire. That's how much they feel about people.
mm-hmm. People are disposable and they're only good insofar as they can help me or hurt me.
Yep.
That's it. That's the equation.
One of the other things I want to point out is that, um, you know, let's just go with the 48 number that he was convicted of.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's really inaccurate to say that he had 48 victims because the number is so much higher.
Oh,
He
absolutely.
murdered entire families.
Hmm.
There, and I don't mean physically murdered them, but he destroyed families. Everyone, everyone that he killed had a family,
Oh, absolutely. It
and
was somebody's daughter.
yeah, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, sometimes somebody's mother's. There were a few that were older. Um, you know,
Hmm.
these parents, maybe they weren't great parents, but maybe they were. It doesn't matter. Um,
Hmm.
Killers like this don't. It doesn't factor in. He destroyed his own family. Um,
Almost definitely.
he had he had ex-wives. He had a current wife, I think, at the time. He had a
Hmm.
sister. He had a brother. He had nieces and nephews, and their name is splashed all over the news for years and associated with one of the most horrific killers in the history of the country.
Yep.
You don't think that takes a toll? And
Oh, absolutely.
he didn't fucking care.
Of course, this goes as well for a lot of the others who juggled a couple different lives as they did this, like
Right.
BTK.
BTK for
Um,
sure. Bundy,
yeah.
in a lot of ways, was very similar. Uh,
Hmm.
when he lived in the Seattle area, when he lived in Utah, a lot of people were taken in by him.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, not all of these people that we're going to look at are the, long-toothed, scraggly-haired, dirty Charles Manson types that are going to be, fawning over people. It goes back to, again, you can't tell them apart a lot of the time from the people at large.
That's right. And I've said several times before, people who, I kind of at times make fun of, the hipsters and the peaceniks who want to stand in a drum circle and light candles for world peace, and how fucking deluded they are
Hmm.
because until you find a way of dealing with these types of people, first identifying them
Hmm.
and then dealing with them, there's never going to be peace on earth because there
No.
have always been and there always will be sociopaths and psychopaths, and a small percentage of those people want to hurt other people.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely. That's one thing that I didn't see much of when I was researching Ridgway was his childhood. If there was anything that
No, you're right.
happened,
You're right. I don't recall
not really a
any.
watershed event.
No, pretty ordinary stuff.
And you look at others who were that way. Dahmer had a fairly normal childhood. There wasn't really a watershed event for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's not always the case. Um,
yeah.
the problem with trying to prevent, identify and prevent, serial killers is you get into a kind of minority report situation where you're effectively um, convicting somebody of
Hmm.
what they might do someday. I mean,
Policing thought. Yeah.
even if you could just come up with some way of identifying potential serial killers before they kill. What do you do with that?
Yeah. I mean, I would think that the ways to stamp it out in that sort of situation might more often than not breed them. You know, you get down indeed the slippery slope of totalitarianism with
Right.
that.
I mean, what? The only way to eliminate serial killers is to kill psychopaths, which means you need your own psychopaths to do that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
you
and then what do you do?
precisely.
And then where are you? Because
Most definitely.
it's um yeah, it's a mess. You know, not every serial killer is a psychopath, oddly enough, but certainly
Mhm.
a vast majority of them and a vast majority of killers in general are psychopaths.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, there's very few who I think the case could be made are not
yeah,
psychopaths.
yeah. Some are just they have schizophrenia or some other mental illness,
Yeah, like
or
Ed
they have
Gein, I think would be one
right, or they have
who may not have been.
some kind of psychotic break, or they're under the influence of drugs or something like that.
Mhm.
But to carry on over a sustained period of time without being caught, um,
Mhm.
you got to kind of be a sociopath.
Yeah, I mean, you really do. I was also thinking with that on the masochism sadism scale, there's very few that I think you could argue were not sadists as well.
Right,
In fact, the only one comes to mind because we mentioned him a couple moments ago was Dahmer.
right.
I think you could make the case that he was not a sadist
Yeah,
if you look at
but
his crimes.
but you're right. A lot of the serial killers want to inflict pain.
Right.
They want to see the suffering, and then they want to see the death at their hands.
Mhm.
It's not enough for them to just kill. Is what I'm saying.
Right. Right. They
Uh,
have to see the suffering.
right. Wow. Well, this guy's never going to see the outside of a jail, obviously,
Mhm.
and he is over in so Walla Walla is southeastern Washington, down in the corner, next to not near the Idaho and Oregon borders, and they grow onions there, and they have a prison and a college, and farms, and
Yeah.
that's pretty much all that's going on down in Walla Walla. And they've got a number of very um, notorious local killers, and this guy tops the list.
Mm. Yep. Now, a big part of that was also after, was it Anne Rule who wrote the book, Green River Running Red?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
You know what? I actually
After
had
her book.
we had a family friend who was a King County sheriff who was on the task force for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that
Uh,
would have been before Dave Reichert was sheriff, because he was the later on
well, no, not
became
yeah.
sheriff.
I'm sorry, a deputy sheriff,
Oh, okay.
not
Uh
sheriff,
huh.
not the
Not
sheriff.
sheriff, sheriff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah, he was on the task force for several years, and then when they stopped making progress in the 90s, they kind of started winding it down, and then he was no longer part of that.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reichert was one of those investigators who was kind of fooled early on, who Keppel had to correct that you're not looking broad enough. Stop looking just in the water.
Right. Yeah, he didn't really exactly cover himself in glory. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, fuck, they had him literally in their hands very early on, and they
Hmm.
and they couldn't connect the dots.
Yep.
They they had the potential to stop this, you know, at a much smaller number of victims, much
Oh
smaller,
yeah.
and they let him get away.
Yep. Exactly. They let him get away till 2001.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm about out of gas on this topic. How you doing? You got
Yeah.
anything else to add?
Nope. I think we beat the hell out of Gary Ridgway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I think this is the last of my personal connections to serial killers to talk about. And I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, that would be a good thing. Y'all
It's,
seem to breed them out there in the Pacific Northwest, so.
Jesus. What the
Yep.
fuck, man? I don't know why. I don't know why it is. Um, but thanks for being on the show again. You're always a great contributor. Appreciate
Well,
your
thank
insights.
you. My pleasure.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.